Welcome to the next segment in the video series that we will go through throughout the semester. What we'll talk about today is twofold. We're going to look a little bit at the first project that we're going to make in the face-to-face portion of the class. And we'll also consider a couple of the techniques, the concepts that I want to teach you. My approach to teaching is a little bit different than a lot of people. I don't want to teach you a project. If I teach you a project, say this one, and I go through all of the steps that it takes to make this project, all you've learned is how to make this project. If I teach you techniques, then you can take those techniques and apply them to a lot of different projects. They're concepts that are they apply to all areas of woodworking, not just a specific project. So I want to teach you techniques, and we'll look at two of those during this video. But while we're at it, I might as well show you a little bit more detail about this. This will be the first project that we'll make in the class. We'll actually start on this the first Thursday that you attend the face-to-face portion. It's just a simple octagon trivet. There are 8 pieces to this that are glued together, and the grooves are cut before you glue them. You'll be provided with instructions and the drawing with all the dimensions. We'll make that trivet out of western red cedar. Now, the school has a very large supply of this wood in this length, and it's a good wood. It'll make a good trivet. And the good news is this wood is free. So we'll be supplying you with 3 of these boards to make your trivet from. Now, when you start with the trivet, it will be rough. This one has been planed. The wood that you'll be given is rough, and you'll have to plane it down to the correct thickness, and then we'll start working from here. But the concept that I want to talk about today first is a concept that I call cutting oversized. When you just take a piece of wood and you start with a piece of wood that you're going to cut components from by cutting narrow pieces out of wider boards. If you start cutting right at the exact width that you need for your project, you're going to cause yourself all kinds of trouble. If you can get in the habit of cutting oversized on every piece of wood for every project, you're guaranteed that your project is going to come out better because you will be able to ensure that you have straight, flat boards for every component in your project. And I'll start talking about that in the next segment, exactly how you go about taking any board for any project and cutting it oversized. Now, the first step in any project when you're going to decide where you're going to cut your project pieces out of a board, you take a look at the board and you see what's present. I've got a small knot right here that would be a bit of a problem to deal with. On this side, not so much. So what I think I'm going to do is call this side of the board the starting point, and then I'll cut my piece from here, and the piece over here will just be a drop. It won't be used in the project. Now, the very first step in cutting oversized is to get one good edge. Now, since I've decided this is the edge I'm going to start on, this is the edge that I will make good. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can put it on a joiner, or you can put it on an edge sander. I'm going to use the edge sander for this particular thing, and I'm just going to take this very rough edge and clean it up and make it perpendicular to the faces of the board and perfectly straight. Now, what I've got is a board that is perfectly straight, perfectly flat, and it's perpendicular to the face grain. So this is what I call getting one good edge. Now, it doesn't really matter how you get that edge. You can get it on the edge sander, you can get it on a joiner. There's even a couple of manual ways that you can get this one good edge. But that's where you start, with one good edge. And then we'll cut this width oversized, and then I'll show you the rest of the process to wind up with a piece of wood that's straight and flat and usable in your project. Okay, now we're back at the table saw where we'll make our cut. We have our one good edge, and that's going to go against the fence. I've got the saw set up to cut at 3 inches. The piece that I'm going to need out of this, my finish width is 2 7/8. So I'll cut it at 3 inches. I usually go 1/8 of an inch over when I'm cutting oversized. So all I have to do now is simply make this cut. Now, I have my piece cut. It's 3 inches wide, but I'm still not positive that this one good edge is still straight. Now, I can lay it down on a flat surface, and I can look at it. Now, you can see in the camera that this is wiggling. When I push on one end, it goes down. When I push on that end, it wiggles. This edge is bowed. So when this piece came out, even though this one good edge was perfectly flat when I started, once I cut the piece out of the wider board, there was internal stress in the piece of wood that made it bow. Now, I can't leave this piece bowed. I've got to correct the bow. I've got to take it back out. Now, the best way to do that is to either go to the joiner or back to my edge sander and create one good edge again. I started with one good edge and lost it when I made the cut. So now I've got to go back and reestablish my one good edge. Now I'm going to go back to the edge sander and do it. It'll be done exactly the same way it was done earlier. And then I'll be back and we'll make our final cut. Now, we're back at the table saw. I've reestablished my one good edge. This edge is now perfectly flat. There's no gaps anywhere along the base. Now, when I put this edge against my fence and trim this edge, which is also bowed, it will straighten it up and make it parallel to my one good side over here. So now I've got a piece that's cut exactly the width that I want. It's at 2 7/8, and both edges are perfectly straight and parallel. So this piece of wood is good to use. It's straight. So when I start cutting my 8 octagon pieces out of this, or whatever I'm cutting, this concept applies to any project. You're going to wind up with a better finished product if you start with boards that are straight and both edges are parallel. And that's what you will get if you follow this system of cutting oversized every time. Now, the board is not going to be warped every time. There are times when you've wasted that 1/8 of an inch, but you don't know until you actually cut the piece out whether or not it's going to bow. You can't tell by looking at the wider piece. So for my money, I'm a lot better off going through this cutting oversized system every single time I cut wood for a project, no matter what the project is. Because by doing so, I can guarantee that I wind up with perfectly straight and parallel sides on every board that I'm going to put into that project. So this is the way we'll do it. In the school, we will always cut oversized, and we will always start with one good edge. And those are your first 2 concepts that you'll learn in this class.